Hey, what's up, everybody? Joe Saunders here for the Managing Violence podcast. Hope you're doing well. Just seeing who we've got here with us. Great to be here. Just going to give everyone a little bit of time just to sign on. Bit of a short notice thing. We decided to go live last night Australia time, so that's about 12 hours ago. What I'm hoping to do is every week at around about this time, either the Thursday or Friday morning my time. So was that Wednesday or Thursday evening for most of the rest of the world, is jump on and do a live for basically to break down the show that was released that week and give you my takeaways, the things that I found really interesting about the show, or about the interview rather. It'd be kind of weird to tell you what was interesting about what I said, but certainly interesting for me about what the guests said and about what I learned from them, because I'm in an incredibly fortunate position as far as self-defense instructors go. I don't know that there's too many other people in the world that have talked to as many world leaders in this space as I have now, and there's not by any virtue of mine. It's just by the fact that I started the show. And people have been very generous with their time. So I've had the incredible fortune to interview, pretty much everybody that I grew up watching or listening to or reading about or watching DVDs and VHS tapes of. So I want to try and share that knowledge as much as I can. I've learned a tremendous amount over the last couple of years, and I want to make sure that I document as much of that as possible so that those of you that are listening that stumble across this YouTube channel, whether it's live time right now or whether it's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if I'm doing something different and this is over, I want you to be able to find this content and still absorb the learnings from these amazing masters of our time. And I think the criminal thing is that there's a lot of incredibly intelligent, knowledgeable people that have dedicated their lives to this field, that have acquired an immense amount of knowledge. And for whatever reason, their knowledge is just not widespread. It's not. They haven't got the appropriate channels for it, or maybe they're pre-internet, or maybe they just never really got on board the social media bandwagon. And I want to try and amplify their message and their learnings as well as contributing my own as well. And I think that's part of the mission of this show. There's a lot of people out there that have an incredible audience with really substandard material, and I'm sure we don't need to link to them, but you've probably all seen, if you're in this industry, you've seen some absolute toxic rubbish promoted as self-defense, and it's got a hell of a lot of likes and follows and everything because it's well presented. Meanwhile, you've got actual world-leading experts that are struggling to get views. So I want to try and do my bit to amplify their message and to bring quality to everybody. So my goal is every week to do a live, just to do a short summary, I guess, of what I found interesting about the interview, and encourage you then to go and listen to the full interview. Obviously, I'm not going to go word for word. That would be silly. But I'm also going to try and break it down a little bit and provide a little bit of my own insight into what was said. So this week, I had the tremendous honor of publishing the interview with Enson Inoue. Now, as I mentioned during the interview, Enson is he was a teenage hero of mine. I came across MMA at around about, I would have been about 1998, 1999. That's when I first started watching MMA with the early UFCs. And the first Enson Inoue fight I ever saw was against Royce Alger, US college wrestler. And Enson armbarred him within the first couple of minutes. And I was really drawn to Enson for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, by that point, I'd already seen Royce Gracie. I'd seen a couple of jiu-jitsu guys come in and do well in the UFC. I think Enson's debut might have been UFC 12 or UFC 13, one of those two. But I'd already seen some jiu-jitsu guys do well. But I'm a big guy, right? I'm even as a 13, 14-year-old, I was probably already bigger than Royce. And for whatever reason, like the little guy thing didn't really grab me. I'd always been bullied by people smaller than me as a fat kid growing up. I was tall, I was big, but I was bullied by the little kids. So So seeing a smaller guy beat bigger guys, I mean, while it was impressive from a martial arts point of view, it didn't emotionally connect with me. But I was pretty intrigued by jiu-jitsu and by grappling. And seeing Enson come in, I mean, Enson was pretty jacked at the time. I saw this like larger, muscular guy, is kind of bit of an alpha male, and come in and pull off a slick, beautiful armbar from the bottom. I was like, "Ooh, that's pretty cool." Hey, big guys do jiu-jitsu too. That's fun. And that was pretty much how it started for me. Hey, g'day, Hastings Dojo, my regular commenter. I appreciate you guys very much signing in from England. But that was the first appeal for Enson, and then that was his only fight in the UFC, unfortunately. But then I became aware of Pride a couple of years later, saw some Enson's Pride fights, and that's really, as I started to become a fan of him, as I realized there was more to the man than just jiu-jitsu and fighting skill. For Enson, it was very much the warrior spirit. And as I started Googling him and learning more about him, and I found his old original website, which I think is long gone, and it really went into a lot of detail about Enson's philosophy on life and philosophy on fighting, the Yamato Damashi, Japanese soul. I think that is kind of a loose definition. And it broke down everything. I remember reading pages and pages of it. He had every tattoo on his body had a story, right? There was a story or a meaning or a philosophy behind it. Of course, Clive. Of course, Clive on Facebook, Hastings Dojo on YouTube. How you doing, brother? All right. So yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time reading about Enson. In those very formative years, I was fascinated by Japanese culture. As you can probably tell, I've got the shoji screens in the background. I've got sumo prints on the wall. I've got samurai prints back here. I've got I do dig Japanese culture. And Enson was kind of an embodiment of that, but an accessible embodiment of that because he was Hawaiian and he spoke English. So anyway, long story short, I was a big fan of Enson. So it was a really tremendous honor for me to be able to reach out to him on Facebook and say, "Hey, would you like to be on the podcast?" As a bit of a deviation because this is not an MMA show and it's not a combat sports show. And I've had the opportunity to interview. I've probably had the opportunity to interview more MMA guys that I haven't taken up purely because I couldn't find a linkage that was really clear back to the actual goal of this show, which was to help people be safer and to really dive into topics that are essential for self-defense and violence management. And for a lot of guys that are just combat sports fighters, other than maybe diving into the training and a little bit of the biomechanics of how they hit and how they grapple and how they prepare and things like that, there really wasn't a lot of meat on the bone for our audience. So I've avoided having a lot of MMA guys on this. There was another connection there. And with Enson, I felt the connection to that warrior spirit was something that had a direct application to managing violence. So here's some things that I took away from the interview. Firstly, I asked Enson about whether the Yamato Damashi, the warrior spirit, whether that was something he was born with or something that he learned about and adopted into his life. And he said he thinks it's something he'd always had. And the reason for that is growing up as a Japanese, as an Asian kid in Hawaii, being a smaller kid. I mean, if you've been to Hawaii, you know, there's some big boys there. But growing up as a smaller kid, he was picked on. He was targeted, had his lunch money stolen, all that kind of thing. And that's a fairly common story. We've heard from a few guests over the years about they were picked on as a kid, and therefore it led to them learning martial arts to defend themselves and so on. It's similar for Enson, but the mindset that it brought into Enson was quite interesting for me because I've talked to a lot of bullying victims, both professionally and as part of the podcast. And there seems to be a couple of different ways that bullying can affect you. Either you become very conflict adverse in that you avoid you avoid conflict at all costs, and you try to fly under the radar and not be victimized. And that's probably the most common response to people that have been bullied growing up. They take a position in life, whether it be the occupation or just their demeanor, where they don't have to get into conflicts anymore, and they quite healthily become quite peace-loving people that don't seek any sort of confrontation. And that can be healthy. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just one way people can go. The second way is that they develop a victim mentality, in that they think everyone's out to get them, and that's clearly not healthy. And the third thing is they can do what Enson did, which is they become confrontational. And I don't think Enson was confrontational in a negative way, but he certainly developed a self-esteem that said, I'm not going to be picked on, and I'm going to stand up for what I believe in. I'm going to stand up for my values, for my morals, for my ethics, and I'm going to fight to the death over what I feel is right. And look, I don't know which is the right way. This is just my observation of what I've seen in terms of how people respond to bullying. And I like, for me personally, as a bullied young kid, I think I was probably somewhere between number one and number three. That I would avoid conflict if it was something I felt like I could let slide, but I would also fight if I felt I couldn't let it slide. So I guess I probably had a little bit of discretion there, but alternating between those two options. And I'm sure there was probably times in my life where I was number two and felt like a victim as well, but thankfully not for an extended period of time. So Enson very much went the Warriors the Warriors approach. You know, he went deep into let's take the gloves off and we'll settle this, or let's draw swords and whoever stands at the end was right. So I found that quite interesting, and from a psychological point of view, as a behavioral science psychology nerd, I find that quite interesting. The second thing that really stood out to me, and this is why it was a clip at the start of the interview, was that Enson said that he always was seeking the fights, like picking fights with people that scared him. So as a professional, he could certainly be excused for not wanting to fight a prime Mark Kerr, certainly not wanting to fight an Igor Vovchanchyn who had just come off a horrific knockout spree, who was like 32-4 or something like that, something ridiculous, like had a crazy record by the time Enson fought him. He legitimately fought, as I said in the podcast a couple of times, he legitimately fought the scariest dudes on the planet when they're at their best. I don't think there's too many people that Enson fought that weren't in their prime when Enson fought them, including Randy Couture. He fought Randy Couture when Randy was UFC champion, and I think he'd just beaten Vitor Belfort. I might have my timeline a little bit off, but Randy was on top of the world, and he just left the UFC due to a contract dispute, but he was, for all intents and purposes, the reigning UFC champ. And Enson took that fight that nobody thought he could win. And nobody, probably even Enson, thought he could beat Randy Couture. And he did. He armbarred him. And that was an incredible fight, an incredible performance, and really solidified Enson as a top-level fighter, not just as an attraction. But I liked the idea that he was seeking fights that scared him, not because he wanted to pad his record, not because he wanted to get bookings, not because he was trying to make a payday, but because he was trying to grow as a human being. And he knew that the way to grow as a human being was to embrace things that scared you, and to face fears, and to continue growing, and to try and find his limits. And look, you look at Enson's record. I think I haven't looked at it for a little while, but I think it was like 12-8. Okay, so it's not a brilliant fighting record by professional standards, I guess, or what we consider a legend standards. I mean, it's better than mine. But I'm better than probably anyone listening, because I don't know if anyone listening fought in Pride or not. But look, I mean, it's not a spectacular record, but that's because he didn't go into fights to win. And he fought at heavyweight most of his career when he really could have fought at light heavyweight or middleweight even. But he decided to fight the best in the world in their weight class at their prime. And at that time, especially in Pride, the best in the world were in the heavyweight division. So, kudos to him for doing that. He raised a story about the reason that he took his first fight was because he wanted to he wanted to face his fear to improve his life. So he just wanted to fight once. Yeah, Clive, you make a really good point there about how he couldn't help being a warrior. Yeah, exactly. We'll get to that as well. We're talking about outside the ring activities, but he was talking about facing his fear as a way of just once, just getting in the ring, just get in the ring once, and to feel what that was like, And then it was going to be one and done, move on with his life, go do other stuff, help Egan run his racquetball company, I guess. And that was pretty much what he was going to do. But the whole genesis of fighting was not because he wanted to be on TV or not because he wanted to be a badass, but because he knew he was scared of it. and that was the motivation. He wanted to be able to face fear and face stress in his life without that hesitation. And I think there's so much value to that. Coming back to picking fights that scared him, and this is part of the reason why I thought there was value in Enson's story from a self-defense point of view, because with training, there's a certain element of embracing failure. Now, this is tricky, and it's something that I'm actually writing an article about at the moment, because I think there's two ways of looking at failure. When I do corporate consulting and I'm talking to organizations about culture and about innovation and things like that, which is what I do when I'm not talking about violence, one of the principles we talk about is a preoccupation with failure. That organizations should always be seeking to fail. And it sounds like a really counterintuitive thing, but we want to try and fail early. We want to trial plans and try to see how early they will fail and pick up on those early signs of failure so that we can correct them and move on. And I apply the same thing to self-defense with a couple of caveats. One, if you are not going to be training regularly, like you're just going to do seminars, or you're just going to maybe you are training somebody who is going to be a casual trainer who just wants to learn how to defend themselves, you don't want to program failure. Okay, so what I mean by that is you don't want to give them a whole bunch of drills that they will die in. Okay, you want to try and build confidence. You want to try and build their I guess their spirit, so that if they were confronted with something, they're not concerned about the fact that, oh shit, last time I did this in training, I died, and now I'm going to die for real, right? You don't want that. You don't want that in their mind. You want a mindset of success, so that they feel 100% confident that no matter what they deal with, they're going to be fine. They're going to live through it. And with that in mind, I never let my students die in drills. I don't care if you've been stabbed 17 times in the drill, like you're still alive, keep fighting. Because we know the human body can withstand immense amounts of punishment if the person just refuses to die. And that's been proven time and time again. And obviously there's physiological limits. you can decide not to die and still end up dead. That's I'm not saying that you're supernatural, but certainly if you give up, then you are most certainly dead. So I never want to train my students to die or to give up, because I don't know where that mentality will manifest in the real world. However, if you are a career martial artist, or you are someone who trains regularly, you train as habitually, and this is part of your life, then you need to seek areas where you suck, right? You need to do the things that you are scared of. For me, even though I grew up in striking martial arts as a kid, I didn't really hit my stride until I started grappling. Right? When I started, you've probably heard my story throughout the podcast if you listen to a lot of them. But I started off wrestling. Wrestling led to judo. Judo led to Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Along the way, I did sumo and belt wrestling and Scotch backhold and catch and a whole bunch of other stuff. But grappling has certainly been my sweet spot. It's been what I'm comfortable with. I can default to. Part of that is physiological. I'm short-sighted. I have astigmatism, and I didn't know that for a long time, and I was just not very good at seeing punches coming. My depth perception was off, and so hence being at grappling range was a lot more comfortable for me, because my depth perception wasn't a big deal. And but yeah, where when people were punching me in the head, I wasn't very good at not getting punched in the head. So striking was definitely something that scared me, and it was something that I wasn't comfortable with, that I tried to avoid. Even when I was bouncing, I was never the guy that got into a fist fight while I was bouncing. One person might be punching, but I was getting in close, grabbing the guy, throwing him down, controlling him, choking him out, whatever I had to do. But my resolution was nearly always grappling, and that was partly because I knew that's where my skill was, partly because I knew it was more legally defensible, and partly because I just didn't like throwing down with people, because I wasn't good at it and it wasn't predictable. But certainly embracing that and getting in and sparring with top level strikers, it sucked, right? It really sucked. It scared me, but it was a breakthrough moment for me. And the same thing, like when I started doing stick fighting, and I'm fighting with sticks with contact. I've never been a good stick fighter. I'm not going to pretend I am, but getting hit with a weapon changes things. So if you've got a weakness for weapons, go sparring and get hit. Learn that it's okay, right? The first time I got cracked over the head with a cane or with a Kali stick, and I lived, I was like, okay, that's a new life experience. I don't know if I want to repeat it, but at least I know if it happens for real, I'm okay. And bouncing was like that for me too. You know, there's a lot of situations I got into where I was scared, legitimately scared, because oh shit, I'm fighting multiple people for the first time ever, or I'm on the ground getting kicked in the head, or I've been bottled, I'm covered in my own blood, or like this, or even just gross stuff like I'm covered in someone's vomit or whatever. You know, like there's those sort of situations that once you've lived through it, everything else feels a little bit better. And I talked to Tim Kennedy about this as well, about the experience of war and, you know, being hit by an IED and being in a 3-day firefight, being sure he was going to die, and how when you go from that kind of situation to professional fighting, yeah, fighting in a cage seems, yeah, as the volume's turned down, right? I mean, if you've been fighting for your life for 3 days against the Taliban or insurgents, thinking you were certainly going to die, then fighting in a cage against another person who probably isn't going to try and kill you, and a referee who's there to protect you, certainly doesn't sound like such a big deal. So embrace things that challenge you, embrace the things that scare you, and that's how you grow. Right, and just martially, I mean, if you're a striker and you're scared of being embarrassed on the ground, go grapple. If you're a grappler, you're scared of being hit, go learn to punch, learn to box, and don't just learn to box on a bag or on pads. Like that's not facing your fear. That's stroking your ego. Yeah, it's developing skills, but yeah, if you want to grow mentally, then you need to get in the ring with someone who may knock you out, and that will change you. And everything else too. Like at a certain point, if you're at a level of proficiency where you're handling one-on-one situations without fear, then do some 2-on-1 drills, do some weapon drills, introduce a shock knife. Add different variables that open up the possibility of failure. And again, you don't want to program failure, but a healthy dose every now and then, just to remind you that you're not invincible, will encourage you, hopefully, to keep training. So I encourage you to do that. I think that's the takeaway between Enson's approach to professional fighting and how we apply that to self-defense. I certainly don't recommend picking real human criminal fights with people that scare you. That's it's probably not a great strategy, but certainly in terms of our training, we can apply that. And yes, Clive, what doesn't kill us does make us stranger, for sure. All right. The other thing, probably the last takeaway, or probably the second last takeaway that I want to talk about from the Enson interview was being prepared to die. So he was famous for living by the Hagakure, or the samurai manifesto, the book that was written by I forgot the author's name. Damn it, Hagakure. Anyway, was the book of the samurai, and the preoccupation with death. And being prepared to die. And Enson said in the during his career that he would never tap. He would rather have his arm broken, have his knee dislocated, be choked unconscious, or be beaten to death than to tap out. And as a normal human being, that sounds a bit silly. I'll be completely honest. I mean, if one of my daughters grew up to be a fighter, and they took that mentality, I would be cautioning them, certainly about the being beaten to death pit. I'd be cautioning them about whether not tapping out to an armbar and potentially losing a year of your career, and maybe not ever having a functioning arm again was worthwhile. But I get it, right? I get it on a spiritual level that he saw MMA not as a career, but as a spiritual and as a personal development endeavor. And because of that, then he was able to, he was able to take that mentality, and to hear him talk about writing letters to his family in the event of his demise, and sealing them up and leaving them there sealed, and then burning them after he lived through the fight, I mean, that goes to show you the level of commitment that Enson took into his fights. And when I go back and I watch Enson's fights now with that context, that this man has written a letter to his family saying, "Don't worry, I died doing what I loved." And then he went in to fight a Mark Kerr or a Minotauro Nogueira or whoever. Man, it certainly adds a different level of significance to what he's doing. So that struck a chord with me, and I think to a degree, I mean that can apply to our self-defense situation as well. You cannot accept tapping out in a real fight. Like if you are being beaten, you can't just tap out and hope the other person stops. Right? I've seen some horrific self-defense. Thanks, Clive. Yeah, Yamamoto Tsunetomo. Yeah, the author of Hagakure. Thanks, man. But yeah, I've seen some horrific self-defense. Maybe 10 years ago, I was watching a clip about defense. Actually, no, it wasn't a clip. Sorry, it was a live demonstration. An instructor was quizzed about how do you escape from a rear naked choke. I think he called it a sleeper hold because it was pre-explosion of the UFC here. How do you escape from a sleeper hold? And his answer was, once it's locked on, you can't escape. Therefore, the best thing you can do is to pretend to be unconscious and hope they let you go. And that kind of stunned me a little bit. It took all my self-control not to stand up and start throwing things at him. Because what an awful strategy. The second you relax while you're being choked, you are going to go unconscious. And once you're unconscious, you don't have any control over what happens next, right? If that person doesn't let you go, either because they intend to kill you or because they just don't know that they're going to kill you or they're going to cause you brain damage by holding on to that strangle, or they are panicking and in a freeze themselves and they're going to hold on until they stop panicking, which could be several minutes later, then you are dead. The idea of just giving up as a strategy is awful. Playing dead is very seldom the way to go. I had fights, again, working in bars. I may have told this story on the podcast before, but we were jumped by a couple of guys in a gaming room, like a poker machine, pokey room. And we were just trying to kick two of them out, and we didn't realize they were in a really large group. They were sort of spread out around the room, and before you know it, it's a big fight. And we were jumped by these guys, ambushed, basically. And as we started to fight back, this one guy, I remember, I got in a tie clinch, and I delivered a really solid knee right to the solar plexus. And I knew as soon as I hit it that he was done, because I could almost feel the air and the soul and the spirit of fighting just left his body the second that knee penetrated. And he collapsed against the poker machine. And I was over the top of him. I had one hand sort of on his throat, on his chest, whatever, holding him. And I had the other fist cocked, ready to hit him. And he tapped me on the shoulder. He goes, "Nah, I'm done, bro. I'm done." And I was like, hang on a minute. You ambushed us. You jumped us. And now you think you get to tap out? What the hell, man? Like, this is real. This is not a game. And the only reason that worked for him was that I had other of his friends to deal with, and I knew he wasn't going to get involved again, so I left him alone and went and dealt with the others. But it is crazy that this sporting mentality kind of infiltrates our approach to real violence and our approach to self-defense, and it's something you got to be really mindful of, because in the dojo, of course, you won't tap out. Of course, you want to be able to you want to be able to roll, get caught, tap, no big deal, start again, right? That's really important from a training perspective, and for you to develop reps and to get over the fear of failure when you're trying to learn a new skill. But you cannot allow that mentality to infiltrate how you approach real violence. So it's very important that we occasionally take that mentality of, when it's real, I am never going to die. I'm never going to quit. The way we can train that, and this is for the instructors that might be watching this, Clive, I know you're an instructor, but also anyone else who's watching, the way we can train this with our students, let's say we're doing a live pressure test, and the person is stuck in a really bad position, and they don't have the skill to escape, or maybe it is like a real, like, hell, they're in a choke, they're not going to get out. It's then on us to control the role player or control the bad guy to provide that avenue for escape. And so rather than the student tapping out and saying, yeah, I'm done, you got me, occasionally, or maybe even deliberately, get the role player to release the hold, or to even just loosen a little bit, just to give the possibility of escape, so that the student still has to fight out of that position and get back to a better position. If you can do that, then it's almost like progressive resistance training when it comes to weightlifting, right? If I want to train someone to be able to deadlift 200 kilos, I don't take them from being able to deadlift 40 kilos and then put 200 on the bar, right? The first thing I want to do is be able to get them to do 45, and then 50, and then 55, and so on, right? That's the plan. So occasionally, rather than giving them the 200 kilo deadlift and having them tap out, I want to say, okay, I'm going to load 200 on the bar, but then we're going to strip it back, and I'm going to get you practice at hitting that 50. And then once you can do that, then we're going to make it a bit harder. And we're going to make it a bit harder. We're going to make it a bit harder. And we can do the same thing with our scenario replication if our goal is to make our students better and not just to crush them so they keep coming back to train. Right? So that's my insight as an instructor. And the very last thing I want to talk about from the Enson interview is that warrior code and how it impacted him outside the ring. So, yeah, I mean, obviously it wasn't just a gimmick. It wasn't something that Enson just wanted to do as a personality or something that made him popular with fans. Like, he lived it, right? He lived that code. Enson has been very forthcoming, not just in our interview, but also in previous interviews and in his book, about his connection with the Yakuza, Japanese organized crime. He was never a Yakuza himself, but he was well respected in their community. He played peacemaker between different Yakuza factions, and he would personally pull them into line if any of their young boys were getting out of line or causing a disturbance or impacting innocent people. And that's something that it feels like he was born to do. Like he had that warrior ethos of justice and honor, and if they deviated from that, he'd pull them back into line. And he tells the story. I think it was in the bulk of the main interview. It may have been in the bonus content. But he tells the story of having to discipline, a friend of his, a Yakuza friend of his, and he didn't really seem to care about the consequences. He was standing by what he knew to be right, and he was more than happy to fight to the death over it. And that's commendable. There's not a lot of men like that these days, and not a lot of people like that these days that are prepared to put their convictions and their ethics and their moral values up against their life and say, this is what I believe to be right, and damn it, I'm going to die if I'm not. I really appreciate that, because it's harder and harder to do that in society. You get frowned upon. There seems to be this prevailing attitude that we should be embracing cowardice, and that really concerns me about our future and about the decisions that our leaders are making. But that's a topic for another day. So, but being able to live the code outside the ring is something that I highly appreciate from Enson. All right, that's it. That's my takeaways from this particular interview. If you have any questions you want me to answer, feel free to leave them in the comments. But also, if you have questions for the next live, which I'm hoping to do next Friday, my time, which is next Thursday night for everybody else, then feel free to add them either in the comments on this video or in our Managing Violence Tribe Facebook group. So just go on a Facebook, search Managing Violence Tribe, or you can send me a DM wherever. I'm on pretty much all the social medias. So if you have questions that you'd like me to address, doesn't have to be about the interviews, could be about absolutely anything else to do with violence. I'll give my best take at answering it. Can be about any of the other previous interviews as well. If you want to know what I thought about James Hamilton from Gavin DeBecker and Associates, more than happy to tell you my insights from that interview or any of the other 63 odd interviews that I've done. So that's it. Thank you for joining us today. Shout out for those that are watching this first ever Managing Violence live stream, #stream of violence. Check out violencepod.com for all the interviews and articles. And I hope you guys have an enjoyable evening or morning wherever you are. I'll see you next week.